afternoon, dear students. Welcome to a new video on Principles of Management. This is part 2 of Principles of Management. So in this slide, we are going to talk about one of the finest gentlemen who is called as Frederick Winslow Taylor. He is also called as the father of scientific management. He was an American mechanical engineer, and he is the author of the book, The Principles of Scientific Management. Now let us talk in brief about Frederick Winslow Taylor. So, Frederick Winslow Taylor was a person who within a very short duration rose from ranks of an ordinary apprentice to a chief engineer in Midway Steel Company, United States of America. Taylor conducted a number of experiments and came to conclusion that workers were producing much less than the targeted standard task. Also, both the parties, management and workers, are hostile towards each other. He gave a number of suggestions to solve this problem and correctly propounded the theory of scientific management to emphasize the use of scientific approach in managing an enterprise instead of hit and trial method. For his contributions, he is well known as the father of scientific management. Scientific management attempts to eliminate waste to ensure maximum production at minimum cost. Now, let us talk about principles of scientific management. So the first principle is called as science, not rule of thumb. The second principle talks about harmony, not discord. The third principle talks about cooperation, not individualism. The fourth principle talks about development of each and every person to his or her greatest efficiency and prosperity. The last principle talks about maximum, not restricted output. Now let us discuss these principles in detail. So let's talk about the first principle, science not rule of thumb. What does this mean? There should be a scientific study and analysis of each element of a job in order to replace the old rule of thumb approach, or it is also called as hit and miss method. We should be constantly experimenting to develop new techniques which make the work much simpler, easier and quicker. Now let's talk about the second principle, which says harmony, not discord. What does this mean? It implies that there should be mental revolution on part of managers and workers in order to respect each other's role and eliminate any class conflict to realize the organizational objectives. Now let's move on to the third point, which talks about cooperation, not individualism. What does it mean? It is an extension of the principle of harmony, not discord, whereby constructive suggestions of workers should be adopted and they should not go on strike, as both management and workers share responsibility and perform together. Moving on to the fourth principle, which talks about development of each and every person to his or her greatest efficiency and prosperity. What does that mean? It means development of competencies of all persons of an organization after their scientific selection and assigning work suited to their temperament and abilities. This will increase the productivity of the employee by utilizing their skills to the fullest possible extent. Now let's talk about the fifth principle, which talks about maximum not restricted output. Here, both the management and workers should try to achieve maximum output in place of restricted output. This will be beneficial to both the parties. Maximum output will result in higher wages for the workers and greater profit for the management. Increased productivity is also in the interest of the consumers and the society at large. Now, in this slide, we will talk about techniques of scientific management, which are namely, number 1, functional foremanship, 2, standardization and simplification of work, number 3, method study, number 4, motion study, number 5, time study, number 6, fatigue study, number 7, differential piece weight system. Now, we will talk about functional foremanship. Now, in functional foremanship, the factory manager has 2 employees working under him, one who will be in charge for planning, the other who will be in charge for production. Now, the planning in charge will have 4 employees working under him, namely the instruction card clerk, the route clerk, the time and cost clerk, the disciplinarian. Under the production manager, you will have an employee who is called as speed boss, the other employee who is called as gang boss, the other employee who is called as repair boss, and the last employee who is also called as inspector. And all these employees will give instructions to the workman. Now let us talk in little detail about functional foremanship. So, functional foremanship is a technique in which planning and execution are separated. There are 8 types of specialized professionals, 4 each under planning and execution, who keep a watch on all workers to extract optimum performance. Now let us talk about planning in charges. So the first planning in charge is called as route clerk. He is going to specify the exact sequence and route of production. The second planning in charge, who is called as instruction card clerk, is responsible for drafting instructions for the workers. The third planning in charge is also called as time and cost clerk, who helps to prepare time and cost sheet for the job. The fourth planning in charge is called as shop disciplinarian. He makes sure that discipline and enforcement of rules and regulations are strictly followed among the workers. Moving on to the techniques of scientific management, we will talk about the production in charges. So the first in charge is called as gang boss, and he is responsible for keeping tools and machines ready for operation. The speed boss is responsible for timely and accurate completion of job. The repair boss has to ensure that there are proper working conditions of tools and machines. The inspector is responsible for checking the quality of work. Now let us go down to the second technique, which is called as standardization and simplification of work. So dear students, the word standardization refers to developing standards for every business activity, whereas the word simplification refers to eliminating superfluous varieties of product or service. It results in saving of cost of labor, machines and tools. It leads to fuller utilization of equipment and increase in turnover. Now, let us talk about the third technique, which is called as method study. Now, let me explain you in detail. So, the objective of method study is to find out one best way of doing the job to maximize efficiency in the use of material, machinery, manpower and capital. Now, let us talk about the fourth technique which is called as motion study. It is the science of eliminating wastefulness resulting from using unnecessary, ill-directed and inefficient motions by workers and machine to identify the best method of work. Now let us talk about the fifth technique which talks about time study. Dear students, time study determines the standard time taken to perform a well-defined job. The objective of time study is to determine the number of workers to be employed, frame suitable incentive schemes, and determine the labor cost. Now let's talk about fatigue study. So what do you mean by this? Fatigue study seeks to determine time and frequency of rest intervals in completing a task. The rest interval will enable workers to regain their lost stamina, thereby avoiding accidents, rejections, and industrial sickness. Let us talk about the seventh technique that is called as differential piece wage system. So dear student, this system links wages and productivity. The standard output per day is established and two piece rates are used. Higher for those who achieve up to and more than standard output, that is efficient workers, and lower for inefficient and slow workers. Thus, efficient workers will be rewarded and inefficient will be motivated to improve their performance. Say for example, the standard task is 10 units and the rates offered are rupees 50 per unit for producing 10 units or more, and rupees 40 per unit for producing less than 10 units. Worker A produces 11 units, he gets rupees 550. Worker B produces 9 units, he gets 360. Now this difference of rupees 190 will motivate the lazy worker to perform better. Now you have a question in your examination which talks about explaining the difference between Henry Fayol and Taylor's principles of management. So let us look at the first basis, which is nature of research. Henry Fayol developed the theory of functional management or management process. However, Taylor developed the concept of scientific management. Now let us look at the concern. Fayol's principles are concerned with management efficiency, whereas Taylor's principles and techniques are concerned more with workers' efficiency. Now let us look at the third basis, which is called as level. Fayol designed principles mainly for top level of management. However, Taylor designed principles for the lower level of management. Now let's talk about the fourth basis, which is called as focus. So Henry Fayol's principles focus on improving overall administration by observing certain principles was his main focus. However, in the case of Taylor, the focus was on increasing productivity through work, and simplification was the main focus. Now let us talk about personality. He developed the personality of a researcher and practitioner, and Fayol was called as father of general management. However, Taylor developed the personality of a scientist and was called as father of scientific management. Now let us come down to the sixth basis. Here the main contribution was to produce a systematic theory of management with the help of 14 principles of general management, and Fayol succeeded to a great extent in doing it. Now let us talk about Taylor. He provided a basis on accomplishment on production line with the help of scientific techniques and management. Now let us look at the human element. So Fayol gave due emphasis to human elements by suggesting principles like equality, initiative, fair remuneration. However, Taylor ignored the human element and emphasized more on increasing productivity. Now let us look at the eighth basis, which is called as rigidity and flexibility. So Fayol's principles were flexible, however, Taylor's principles were rigid in his approach, and he felt that there should be no deviation from the fixed standards. Now let us talk about applicability. Fayol's principles are applicable to business as well as non-business organizations that are applicable universally. However, Taylor's principles are applicable to production and manufacturing, that is, are applicable to specific situations only. Now let us come down to the 10th basis, which is called as unity of command. Fayol strictly follows this principle, that is, one boss for one employee. However, in the case of Taylor, he did not follow this principle. Instead, he insisted on minimum 8 bosses. Thank you, dear children, for being patient. I hope you like the video and subscribe for it.